Hey everyone, I wanted to show a quick demo in Tableau on how to create sparklines. We've talked about sparklines in class and how they're often used in dashboards to show a quick visualization of recent time series variation in data next to whatever a current or present value is. So I'm going to show you how to make these in Tableau, and it's actually pretty straightforward. We're really just going to make a bunch of line graphs by category and then format them to a certain size so they look like sparklines. So I'm going to use I'm using the Tableau Superstore workbook, and we're going to use the Superstore sample data. And I'm just going to end up, what I want to do is end up making something. Let me show you what the end result will be here. We're going to make, our end result is going to look something like this, where we're going to have our key parameter that we're trying to show a current value of, and then show some historical changes over time and sparklines next to it. So we're going to I'm going to show you how to make these sparklines right here. And then once we have these, we can just add them to a dashboard next to whatever table that we put in the dashboard next to it. Okay, so how do we make these? In a nutshell, these are just individual line charts for each one of these categories, and we've just shrunk them down and added a couple of calculated fields in order to find these lower and these minimum and maximum values. All right, so we're going to get started here. I'm going to start by, I just want to create some line charts by date, some time series charts. So I'm going to drag order date onto my columns. And I'm going to change this from a dimension to a continuous value. So I'm going to go here down to month. You notice it turned green, so now this is a continuous measure. So it's not being treated as a categorical variable anymore, and I'm going to do it in months. So we're going to plot something over months. I'm going to drag sales onto my rows, and so these are just the sales over time. So my sparklines are going to be the sales per month over the last couple of years, and I'm just going to create these by different categories. So I'm going to go ahead and drag onto here a subcategory, and so now you see you've got different lines for each one of our subcategories. That's the basic beginnings of our sparklines. The rest of it is really just formatting and doing some additional calculated fields to show minimum and maximums on the lines. So there's a couple things we need to do. We need to click on Edit Axis, and we're going to get rid of Include Zero because sparklines aren't meant to show a specific value. They're just kind of meant to show a trend. So we don't need to show zero in our axis. And we're going to also put independent axis range for each row or column. So that way we're not using the same exact axis limits and range for each one of these subcategories. This will make our sparklines stand out a little bit more because, again, we're not comparing the actual values in sparklines. The point of sparklines is to kind of show the trend over time. So go ahead and apply that, and you'll see that we got some changes here in how these look, because now we're no longer restricting the axes to have the same limits and scale. All right. I'm also going to need to do a couple things. I'll change the color. We'll go ahead and change the sparklines to black. And now what I need to do is add a couple of calculated fields. What we want to do is show what the max point is on the sparkline and what the minimum point is on the sparkline. And to do that, what we're going to do is actually add a second graph on top of this using a dual axis, where we're just going to plot those 2 points. So we'll plot 1 point for the max and 1 point for the minimum, and then we're going to color those based on whether or not it's a max and minimum. So we're going to create two calculated fields. So the first calculated field we're going to create is just to be able to identify the 2 points that we want to plot. So we basically want to show that point on a graph if it's one of the maxes or the mins. So I'm going to create a calculated field. Oops, here it is, and we'll call this low high. It's just going to identify whether or not this is a low or a high value and allow us to plot it on the graph. So we'll just say if, and then we're looking at the sales, so sum of sales is equal to, and we're going to use this function called window max, and window max is just going to look at the values within the window that we're currently in. In this case, that'll be this column here for subcategory. If it's the max value of the sum of sales, then we just use that value, basically sum of sales. It means that we allow that value to be something that we plot, right? So we're just finding the maximum value in all these data points, and when we find it, that we're just setting that to be what we show on the plot. Else if, is we want to plot both the max and the min, sum of sales equals window. In this case, we're going to do a min, and we'll do sum again of sales, then sum sales, and then we have to end. Okay. All right, so all this is going to do is just going to go through all the data points within each subcategory, and if it finds a value that's the maximum, it's going to make that a point that it will plot, and if it finds a value that's a minimum, it'll make that a point that it's going to plot. So we're going to go ahead and apply that and hit OK. And so we've got this low-high value here, and I'm going to go ahead and drag that on here, and I want to combine it. I actually want to have a dual axis chart. So I'm going to drag that on here, and you'll notice that we have some points showing up here at the minimums and the maximum. So it's showing those points here, so they're overlapping with our charts, which is good. That's what we wanted to see. But we have to do a couple little things first. Actually, I want to put this up here. I'm not sure why I did that. Okay, so let's do this again. So I apologize. By dragging on the measure values, it kind of jumped ahead from what I wanted to show you. So it's created a separate plot for each one of these, and I want to do this in dual axis. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on dual axis, and now you see we've got dual axis on both sides. This is for that low-high. This is for the actual time series plot of sales, and you'll see we get our dots showing up on there. But you notice that it kind of overrode our formatting we did on the axes, so we're going to go ahead and go back and make sure both axes are set up to not include 0 and be independent. Apply, and we'll do that on the other one here too, so that you notice if one of them is like that and one of them's not, then the scales aren't the same. So I'm going to go over here and take off include 0 and independent and apply and hit OK. So now you notice we've got points on our plot where we have a maximum and a minimum value. So we're getting close to having a spark line to represent that time series plus an indicator of where we have a min and a max. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of those dots a little bit so that they stand out a little bit more. So we're getting close. What I just want to do now is update it so that the color is different for whether or not it's a minimum or a maximum. So we're going to make another calculated field this time. And this time we're going to basically use the same logic we did before, but instead of saying plot that point, we're going to just give it a label, low or high, and then we'll use that low or high in order to do some coloring. So we're going to call this color low high, and we'll start off and just say, just like we did before, if sum of sales equals window, we'll do min sum of sales, then we'll make the value of this variable equal to, sorry, so syntax here, low. Okay, so if we find the minimum value in this range here, we're going to go ahead and assign this term low to it. Else if sum of sales equals window max sum sales, then high, end. Okay, so now the reason why we have to do this is because our previous low-high calculated field is just showing these values. It's not labeling them, and we just want these to be able to show those values on the plot. We're plotting this low-high value. Basically, you can think of this as a dot plot being put on top of our existing line plot. This is just basically like a little, not quite a Boolean, but it's the same idea that if we see when it finds the one that is the maximum, it's going to label it as low, or sorry, minimum label as low. When it's the maximum, it's going to label it as high. and we can use that to do colors. So that's been applied. I'm going to drag now. We should find that in probably our measures. Where did that show up? There we go. Colors, high, low, low, high. And so we just drag that onto color. And you'll notice now we have two different colors. We have an orange and a red for low and high. So we can go in and edit our colors. I'm going to make the high be green and the low be red because that's a common way that things are shown for Sparklines. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of our little cards over there. And so now we've got our points and we've got the colors based on whether or not it's low and high. I'm going to also get rid of some of the headers because we don't need to see those. I'm going to hide the title and hide the labels. So we basically have our Sparklines now that are set up with our red and green representing our highs and our lows. And the rest of it is really just formatting. So we can, for example, bring this in to make these look more like Sparklines. And we can change this to fit the height. And then all of a sudden we've got, and I'll hide this down here, now we've got a series of Sparklines for each one of our categories. And we could combine that with our profit ratio plot like this. This is just a simple table where I've got each one of the subcategories listed here and each one of the profit ratios here with some color for whether or not it's profitable or not. And if we fit the height there, it doesn't look so hot, but what we can do is just combine those two things into a dashboard and basically put these right next to each other. So that, in a nutshell, is how you make Sparklines. The rest of it is just really formatting it in a dashboard pane so that things line up and look pretty. You can do things like go to format, the format card, and do things like remove these lines, remove all the stuff around it, and eventually what you'll end up with, I don't want to spend time on that because that can take a little bit of time to do it. Eventually what you can end up with is something like this, where you've got one worksheet which is your Sparklines next to the other worksheet which is your table, and it gives you that nice standard look of what a Sparkline does. It shows you some historic values over time next to a static value that you're currently looking at. Alright, so in a nutshell, that's one way to make Sparklines. Another common thing you see in Sparklines is that instead of marking the high and the low, you might want to indicate the last point and give that last point a color. You'll see that format a lot, and so to do that you need to do a calculated field similar to what we just did here to find the highs and the lows, but instead you use what's called the last function, which will find what the last point is and mark it. I'll let you guys try to figure that out. A couple Google searches will probably show you how to do that. So quick and dirty Sparklines in Tableau. Thanks.